So we're here in Zurich live, and I'm with Adrian Taffinder, who's a psychologist and runs a subconscious surgery. Can you explain how you got into that and the events that led up to you exploring this path and what it all involves?
How long have we got? I mean, really, this started when I was a late teenager, consciously. I took part or kind of joined this network marketing company called Amway. And they had a big self-development kind of side to it, where you got a tape every week and a book. So it shows everyone how old we are. It's a tape. And they're all self-development, and I used to listen to Zig Ziglar and Bob Proctor back in the day. And I just knew then, and I remember the thoughts I had back then, and it's a couple of years ago now. And I remember very, very vividly thinking, one day, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah?
What age was this?
19.
Okay.
Yeah, 19, 20. And I just knew one day, I'm going to be doing something like this. I'm going to be on stage. I'm going to be talking about this stuff. But I also knew that I needed to have some life experience to be able to actually do it. Now, I've been quite maybe entrepreneurial for many years up until that point. I mean, I wanted to earn money from a very young age. So at 11 years old, 12 years old, I had 3 paper rounds and a money collection round. So I delivered the papers on a morning. Excuse me. So I'll do that again. So when I was 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, I had a paper round, 3 paper rounds, and a money collection round. And I delivered the papers on a morning, which took me about an hour. I had an evening round, which took me about an hour and a half. I did a Saturday and Sunday round. And then on Fridays, I went and collected all the money for it. So at that age, I was earning something like 40 odd pounds a week. I mean, I'm 45 now. So this is going back 30 odd years ago. So for an 11, 12-year-old, I was earning quite good money. Yeah. And when I started buying home audio separates, I was into my hi-fi. So at like 14, 15, I was buying and selling hi-fi equipment. I'd, buy second-hand equipment. I am a bit of an avid researcher. I always like to know as much as I possibly can about any subject I'm interested in. So I would buy really well, get top-end equipment that people were selling at a good price because they didn't know what it was. And then I would play around with it and listen to it and use it for a couple of months, and then somebody had offered me more for it, so I'd sell it and then buy something better. By the time I was 17, I had a £27,000 home audio system. Again, when you consider how far back that was, it's probably the equivalent of about a £70,000 audio system today, in today's money. So, I bought and sold a lot of things. And when I was 21, I decided to set up an official business. And, I had a property renovation company. And within 2 months of setting this company up, we had 28 employees. We were turning over about 50,000 a month, but we had about a good 40 to 50% margin. So we were making £20,000 a month profit at 21 years old. So I did exceptionally well very quickly. And my dad was always into sales, and he'd kind of give me a few of these ideas and tips and ways of thinking. And in hindsight, how I used what we call now, and the buzzword is the law of attraction, and positive thinking, all that kind of stuff, I just naturally used it all my life. It's like if I was going out to a sales appointment, I would literally talk to the person I'm going to visit. You know, I'll be like, right, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I really appreciate your time. I thank you very much for, you know, welcoming me and really liking everything that we're talking about. And, you know, it's brilliant that we get on so much. And, you know, I'm really grateful that you want to give me a business. So thank you very much. And I'd have that conversation all the way there. And, you know, basically I did the sales training for the company. And on average for the industry, the conversion ratio was about 1 in 4. Yeah, so every 4 appointments that you had an opportunity to sell, you'd close one. My closing rate was 1 in 1.2. So, you know, it was miles better than everybody else. In hindsight, I realised what magic I was tapping into. And when you understand the deep energy side of it, how we communicate between human beings, and the spiritual side of it, that we're all one. And energy travels at the speed of light. In some cases, they feel it's quantum entanglement, so it's instantaneous, and people feel it. Then I now understand why I was getting such high conversion ratios. So my only challenge that I had in all my businesses, I've had about 7 so far, is when they first started, I got a lot of success, generated a lot of sales, things like that. But the problem I was having is I was choosing the wrong business partner. And I ended up getting screwed, you know, as they say very often.
Was that through choosing friends who you just get on really well with and then?
No, it was people that I met through industry, you know, synchronistic meetings, opportunities come up, it seems really good, feels really good. Although in hindsight, I ignored the little voice in the back of my head that was screaming to me, don't do it. Yeah? And when I talk to any of my clients, and when they tell me about some of the major catastrophes and problems and relationships they've had, I'll always ask them, right at the beginning, in hindsight, did you kind of knew you shouldn't have done it? And 95% of the time they go, yeah.
So they were going with the intuition rather than the intellect?
No. It was the intellect instead of the intuition. It was the intuition that whispers in your ear.
Okay.
It's your intellect that screams.
Mm-hmm. And how does the ego play a part in that?
Your ego causes a lot of disruption because ego is fueled by desire. So if people are giving you the right rhetoric and the right promises, your ego wants to believe it. Your intuition knows, yeah, that gut instinct, right? That little voice that goes, the guy's not sincere, this girl's going to cheat on you, you know, all this kind of stuff. And some people think that's fear and kind of block it down, right, and go with it anyway, because, you know, in the industry, they talk about feel the fear and do it anyway. That's not actually necessarily the best way to operate.
Mm-hmm. So how would you advise someone in business or in life in general or in relationships to go with the true inner voice rather than, as you're describing, the one that gets you in trouble and can bankrupt you?
3 times. The key is understanding what it sounds like, what it feels like. That
perhaps finding the root.
The root is the key to the self-sabotage. Yeah. What keeps perturbing you from your path? What keeps shouting in your ear and grabbing your attention and making you go in a particular direction? That is usually the self-sabotage, right? The problem with intuition and self-sabotage is they feel very similar, but there is a subtle difference. In hindsight, we can always see this subtle difference, but we don't have it in foresight. And the reason is the subconscious mind, you know, the bit that I deal with, doesn't want to grow. It doesn't want to improve. It just wants to stay where it is because it's familiar. It knows here, right? There's some people might have heard of this kind of story, but there's a story about a guy who's sitting on a little kind of veranda porch, right? And if you imagine the American style, you know, house on the prairie, kind of wooden porch with a rocking chair, and there's a dog in the corner, and they're sat there, you know, just watching the night draw, you know, close down, and dog keeps letting out this whimper. And the guy goes to the owner, he says, "What's up with your dog? Your dog just keeps whimpering and moaning." He says, "Oh yeah, where he's lied down, there's a nail that sticks up. And it causes him a load of discomfort, but just not enough to move." And that's how a lot of people are in life. You hear them moaning about their job, grumbling about their situation, moaning about their relationship. 12 months later, they're moaning and groaning about the same thing. They've not done anything about it. Why?
Now, Donald Trump, who was at the World Economic Forum that we just came from, or I did, he said that the two key obstacles that hold people back, in his opinion, are lack of education and bad habits. Now, bad habits, that encompasses a hell of a lot. You can put fear, doubt, desire, perhaps, in that as well.
In life, what you've got to look at is perspective. Yeah? So there is a perspective which would say education is wrong in that sense. If you take education as far as the academic route. Yeah? Because that's not necessarily the biggest significant point. There is somebody, I'm not sure where they are on their net worth. I know he has never considered running for president, but there's a guy who runs a lot of companies, owner of the Virgin brand.
Richard Branson.
Yep. So he's dyslexic like I am. Yep. Didn't engage with the education system, and is, I would say, to some people's metric, quite successful. Yeah? So education, if you're going to take it as the literal sense as the academic route, then I don't agree with that statement.
I couldn't agree with you more. The number of people I know that gave up at a very young age because they were branded at school as a failure.
I was.
Some were dyslexic, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at school, I was in remedial for English, which was the bottom set for the real thickie of the thickies. Yeah. Because I couldn't read, and I did probably half a page of writing for the 2 years of my exam period. Yeah. But I was dyslexic. Symbols, numbers give me physical headache to attempt to read and write. Yeah. Maths, I had a deal with my maths teacher that if he allowed me to go to sleep, I wouldn't disrupt the class, right? But the thing was...
Why didn't I think of that?
I know, it was a classic move. And, you know, in science, I did 1 page of writing for the whole 2 years, for the exam period, right? But when I did my exams, I got 98% in my science exam, and I got 97% in my maths exam. So when I sat down for an hour and went through the multi-choice and everything like that, I knew all the information. Yeah? It wasn't like I hadn't retained it.
So you could focus when you had to, but you just couldn't do it in class.
It's putting it in writing and writing it and describing it and all that kind of stuff in the written word. Even now, I mean, I'm writing a book. Now, that's technically an incorrect phrase. What I'm actually doing is I'm recording videos, I'm downloading all my stuff, I send it to a ghostwriter that transcribes it all and then formats it into a book. So who's writing it? Well, if you take the literal sense of the word, they're writing it.
Sort of like Osho. He never wrote a single book, but all his stuff was recorded and his followers wrote dozens and dozens of books.
Right, yeah. So a similar sort of scenario. So I never engaged with the education system at all, right? I messed around as much as possible. One big challenge I had was back in my day, in the UK, basically it was a very white school, right? People like to find people to single out and pick on and abuse, and people with ginger hair was the flavour of the day back then, Yeah? I mean, there's all sorts of different flavours depending on where you go. Humans are cruel, you know, quite often. And, you know, I basically had, my friends got beaten up because
They were hanging around with you.
they were hanging around with me. Yeah? And they get teased. Oh, don't go near him, you'll get gingivitis. You know, I was treated like a disease.
Yeah, funnily enough, my dad's ginger. And
Right.
Don't know if you can spot it from there, but I've got mostly ginger in my beard.
Well, they say everybody's got a bit of ginger in them somewhere.
So I'm a semi or half ginger.
So my experience of school was constantly being picked on because of my aesthetics. Yeah, what colour my hair is. Yes, colour seems to be a topic people like to pick on for some reason. And so I overcompensated by rebelling, which was part of maybe me sleeping in class and everybody thinking I was cool because I managed to negotiate sleeping in class and getting out of doing work. I used to climb the drain pipe and go onto the roof of the school and stuff like that, and then get in detention. But part of that, it was twofold. One, I did something which I actually got some attention for, which was cool in some of the kids' eyes. So it kind of took the stain away from my ginger hair. The other one was that it got me in detention at dinners and breaks, which means I wasn't exposed to bullying. I didn't get beaten up because I was in a safe space.
Were you ever diagnosed with ADHD? Or is that more recent?
They didn't have that back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you weren't ever given any meds for hyperactivity?
Oh, no, not at
But
all.
you might have done if you were a child today.
A lot of geniuses are given Ritalin and all these drugs because their brain's hyperactive. You know, Josh, who you're going to be doing an interview later, he had a very similar disenfranchisement from school. He pretty much did nothing. Most people that are processing faster than actually they're learning get bored as hell. And that was me. I was just bored. Right? Ask me a question, I'd give you the answer. But I don't want to spend an hour of a class, right, regurgitating it and reiterating it. I already know. Right? And I don't want to write about it because I can't write, right? Not because I don't know the words, it's because the words are like an anagram to me.
So how would you reformat the schooling system to better nurture people like you?
Just look at the Scandinavian companies, and they are shortening the school week to a lot less hours. I think it's 6 hours a day now. They've got rid of homework. They're not categorising people by their age and gender and things like that. They're not doing curriculum activities till over 7 years old. I think in some now they're saying that they stay with the parents till they're 7 years old. You know, it was Aristotle that said, "Show me a boy of 7 and I'll show you the man." Yeah, and that's because the developmental stage, you're in certain, developmental stages, which I talked about in my workshop, theta brainwave state. You disassociate the kind of rational part of your brain, and you just take things in. There's a great TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson about the education system. It's an RSA, cartoon one, and he talks about how it hasn't changed since the early 1900s. Yeah, it was designed to print human beings for industry. But the problem is these days, industry is moving too quickly for the education system. It's not fit for purpose. So basically, the people that are coming out the other end are for a economy that was 10 years ago.
I see.
So we need to be a lot more malleable and flexible and have a bit more neuroplasticity with education. Education comes from the ancient Latin word, educo. It means to bring out, to induce from within. That's not what the education does. It's batter in to regurgitate on a piece of paper to get stats to prove they're a good school.
Yeah, I always felt it did more to stifle creativity and innovation and true potential than it ever did to really tap into one's greater potential.
Well, you couldn't be any more correct, because there's a very interesting psychometric test that they did, a very big study. And what they did is there's a special test. It's like if I give you a paperclip and I say to you, right, how many things could you make out of this paperclip? Right, give it to an adult, they'll go, right, well, I could make it into a tie pin. Yeah. If I bend that, I could clean my hair out with it. Yeah. I could take my SIM card out of my phone with it. Yeah. I could maybe do a lockpick. And after about 10, 15 things, give it to a child, they're like, oh, if it's 200 feet tall and hollow, we can have a water slide. Yeah. And all of a sudden, they get 200 or 300, they don't stop. So this psychometric test it's not relative to age. It's not an aptitude test as such. It's a creativity test. When they give it to 5-year-olds, 95% of 5-year-olds test at genius level. In other words, they do more than 150 ideas.
Okay.
When they retested the same ones at 16, less than 10% tested at genius level. The education system isn't supposed to improve your thinking, but that simple test shows it completely destroys creativity.
Perhaps that could also have something to do with the ego structures that become far more resilient and just, for example, I went to a conference 2 years ago where there was a lady that studied LSD using fMRI, and she showed that the brain lights up in a very similar way with a person on LSD as a child of 3.
Yeah, it uses the whole brain. The whole brain just lifts off. Yeah, and you're right. But if you know this, and you see a direct correlative effect to what you're doing, destroying that, shouldn't you change it? Shouldn't you then change your ways to maintain and enhance that, or at least maintain it, but not reduce it by like 80%?
Yeah. So can we move on to the lecture or workshop that you delivered yesterday? Was titled Subconscious Surgery, and it focused on human potential and really encouraging people to break out of their constricted mode and reach their full potential.
Yeah.
Could you describe your methodology and philosophy behind it?
Sure. I mean, one thing that, is my tagline is releasing your true genius. Yeah? And you're probably familiar with Einstein's phrase, if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will spend all its life thinking it's stupid. Yeah? Would just come from the education system. So that's why everybody thinks they're stupid, or it destroys their creativity. So what we get is layers of conditioning. Yeah? So when you're at school, right, and you get something wrong, or you want to speak up and it's not your turn, it's shut up, sit down, we don't want to listen to you, right? What I've got to say is more important. Yeah, write this down, and it's very dictatorial. Yeah, there's not as much engagement, or especially there wasn't back then. Things are changing, but not quick enough. So what happens is that we create a world view of what we can and cannot do, and what's within our parameters, right? And it's basically what they call implicit memories. We have emotional memories. So implicit means that something comes up, we have a certain feeling, that feeling makes us act a certain way, and that certain way gets in a certain result. Yeah? Now, the definition insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So, the primary thing is your thinking. Your thinking is what causes your behaviour. But what causes your thinking isn't you. And this is the bit that people have got to understand. Because everybody takes ownership of it, but actually, it's got nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with that programming. Yeah? So it's like a computer, right? When you first buy a computer, you install your base operating system, you put some of your programs on that you want to operate, and it's a flyer. It's brilliant, working quickly, nice and smooth, no glitches. A year later, when you've probably been surfing sites that you weren't supposed to be on, or downloading programs which aren't from the right kind of developers, all of a sudden your computer starts crashing and gets dysfunctional, gets slow, right? And what it is there's algorithms in the background that are in conflict with the main operating system because maybe they haven't been written properly. That's basically how we operate. Yeah? So, classic example, a lot of people are scared of public speaking, right? And they go, oh yeah, I'm just not a public speaker. That's them taking ownership. They're reinforcing the belief. Yeah? What it was is they don't remember when they were 5 years old or 7 years old or something, they stood up in class to answer a question, they got it wrong, and then all class was like, thicky, stupid, right? Because kids are cruel, yeah? And they felt embarrassment. That embarrassment was like, right, standing up and talking feels like this, yeah? Now they get that feeling, they get the situation, they link them together, kind of lock them together and stick them in their memory. So when they say, right, do you want to stand up and tell the group who you are and what you do? Dump of adrenaline, yeah? Norepinephrine, cortisol, you know, all these kind of neurochemistry fires off in your body, right? And what your body's going, remember last time? It didn't go well, right? Don't do it. And what it's doing is trying to save your life. It's the fight or flight response. It thinks you're in danger and it's preparing to fight for your life or run for your life. The most common one is freeze. Shouldn't use that finger, should I? So the most common one is freeze. So you don't want to get up. Yeah? Oh no, I'm okay, I don't want to share. Yeah? Or you go to stage and you're sweating because the thing is it thinks you're going to die. This is the ancient mechanism that's been triggered. It wants to run or fight. Running and fighting takes a lot of energy. So the neurochemistry changes the operating system of your computer, your biomachine. It tells the muscle cells to take on 3 times more glucose than it needs because it's like a turbo, it's spinning up, ready to have that strength. Your heart starts pounding because you need more oxygen and more blood and more nutrients to power those machines. Yeah, you start sweating because you're going to produce heat. You want to expend that heat. So these are the mechanisms that are just preparing to exert yourself, right, because of the danger. In reality, there's no danger. Yeah, you're not going to get eaten. But it's the same mechanism of you thinking you're going to get eaten. It's a very Neanderthalic mechanism, right? So you're panicking because you don't know what to say. In your head, you're going, I don't know what to say. So when you get up, self-fulfilling prophecy, you don't know what to say, which then reinforces the belief that you shouldn't be public speaking.
I can really empathise with that because I had a massive fear of public speaking. And I got invited to give a lecture last year and I was like, I've never done this, I cannot do it. So I went to Toastmasters here and I did 5 talks and I wasn't nervous at all, and everyone said I did a brilliant job and I should talk on big stages, and I was like, I couldn't believe, it didn't feel like they were talking about me.
Yeah, disassociation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what you were suffering there is a thing called cognitive dissonance. Yeah, the old program is saying you're not good, you know you can't do it, it's dangerous, yeah, which was the feelings you had at first. Yeah. So you got a safe space to go and do it where you were kind of comforted and nurtured and given confidence. Mm-hmm. You did it. You didn't experience the pain which you had associated with it, which was the confusing bit, because now the 2 programs don't match. Yeah? That's cognitive dissonance. And then that cognitive dissonance sort of starts to subside because the new program that actually I can speak up and I can talk and I can do a good job because I'm getting all this praise and adulation and confirmation that I'm actually good, and then the new program starts settling in, and then eventually that new program overrides the old one and it says to the autonomic system, we don't need those neurochemicals, is actually safe.
I'd like to add to what I just mentioned about empathising with that whole experience. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking about there's usually a trigger like a past trauma that causes a fear of public speaking, I pinpointed it down to when I was about 6, 7 years old, when I was selected to sing in front of the whole school and all the parents and light candles. I went to a Jewish school, so I had to light the candles and sing a prayer. And I froze and forgot the words and was shaking and couldn't light the candles. The teacher had to hold my hand. And my whole entire life, I had this tremendous fear based on that single experience.
Yeah.
And last year I broke through it.
Yeah. So that experience was when you embedded a program. I shouldn't go on stage because of that fear. So basically that emotion, every time you thought about going on stage was that implicit memory, and that's what we call an explicit memory now. An explicit memory is when you actually remember the event that caused it.
Now, we had a brief chat yesterday about where do these emotions, where do they stem from? And is it the body, is it the mind? I personally think it's the body. As one of the godfathers of psychology, William James, he said that the emotions stem from the body and then the mind latches on to the physiological phenomenon.
Correct, yes. There's a great book by Candace Pert, who's a neuropharmacologist. She wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion, right? And we talk about the body-brain, right? So in subconscious surgery, I actually scan the body to find out where the emotion's stored. Because different parts of your body have different language attached to them. Your liver's about fear, and anger, right? Your shoulders are about bearing responsibility. We've all heard the phrase, oh, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Yeah? Your hips are about being supported. Your knees are about being flexible, right? So different parts of your body, different organs, different illnesses. Your skin is about your self-worth and feeling comfortable in your skin. Yeah.
I have a lot of problems with my gut from time to time. What would that possibly be down to?
There's a number of things with the gut. If I have a little pause, just a minute. Where's my laptop bag? No, it's over here because we're doing a session. I've got a little bit more length. There we go. Cool. Just had enough. So if you're wanting to, right, ask the question again.
So I tend to get a lot of trouble with my guts from time to time, and it seems to be correlated to when my brain is stagnant as well.
So with your gut, there's a great book to learn about all this kind of stuff. It's a book called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die by Carol S. Truman, right? And there's an area in the back which lists all the diseases, organs and everything like that, and then relates the emotions. There's also another book by Louise Hay called Heal Your Body, which again does the same thing, and both are quite correlative. There's actually a number of very ancient Chinese modalities which list all the parts of the body and the language attached to them. I was in Shanghai not so long ago talking to one of the kind of teachers of it, and we were comparing notes, and they were really, really very similar. So if we go to the gut, let's have a look, E, F, G. So stomach problems, okay? So we can look at irritable bowel system, you can look at bowels and things like that. So stomach problems is our sense of security feels threatened, fearing new ideas, lack of affection, condemning the success of other people, or, unhappy feelings, yeah? So unhappy feelings seems a bit generic, but what I would do is usually there's multiple things attached to it, right? So if you said, oh, I've got stomach problems, so what I would do is using the muscle testing, right? I would test the individual phrases, right, to find out which one relates to you, yeah? And then I would scan the body again, find out if there's is this emotion stored in somewhere else in the body? Yes, it is. Right, we'll scan it again. Oh, we get, your hips. So your hips about fear about making major decisions. There's nothing to look forward to. Lack of emotional and physical self-support. Not wanting to accept present experiences. Non-acceptance of physical experiences. Yeah? So I'd test those. And it's basically, what we're doing is we're finding out where in different parts of your body that this particular belief system is stored, right? And this talks about the molecules of emotion. We look at information being stored on a cellular level, right? And when you understand how your cells talk, actually each cell has its own kind of consciousness, and it talks to the cell next to it. Some people call it broken telephone, where is a game where you whisper a word in your ear, you can only say it once, and then they pass it on and pass it on, pass it on. Yeah, but basically your cells kind of communicate like that. Separate to the nervous system, separate to the meridian system, separate to neurochemistry, because neurochemistry is a form of communication. They're neurotransmitters, yeah? And interestingly enough, with a bit that also corroborates this, which is the molecules of emotion, your brain holds 95% of the neural peptide receptors in the thalamus. Yeah? So the thalamus is where 95% of the neurochemistry receptors are, right? A lot of the neurochemistry is produced in different parts of your body. The brain doesn't tell the parts of your body to produce those neurochemistry. And the neurochemistry is a one-way communication from the body to the brain. And in fact, the neurochemistry alters your behavior more than anything else. Yeah? Because if you meet somebody, or you go into a situation, or previously if you were asked to speak, that dump of chemicals modified your behavior in that moment. Yeah? If you met somebody and you didn't like them, that feeling is chemicals. Your body has made an association with somebody like that, of that energy, that look, whatever. Dump chemicals in, you feel a certain way, and because of that feeling, you will decide how you approach them, how you deal with them, whether you make friends with them. It's got nothing to do with them. It's a projection. It's a perception of who they are based on your past experience. So if you knew someone called John at school that picks on you all the time, chances are you might have an aversion to people called John. If you have just come out of a relationship with an incredibly abusive girlfriend who was called Jane, the chances are you might go, oh, last time I bloody date someone called Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, I got a car ride with Bernd Wall, who was a professor at UC Berkeley on engineering and entrepreneurship. And he mentioned that we make a lot of judgments and decisions about people based on their smell.
Yes.
And these are often smells that we don't consciously perceive.
Totally. In fact, to kind of tag on the back of that, one study I found very interesting was they did a study on sexual attraction, right? And what they did is they got a number of clothing items and got people to smell them, right? And look at a picture, right? And decide who they found most attractive, right? When they did that, what they did is they took swabs of all their bacteria on their body, right? And in their mouth and things like that. And our bacteria is either compatible or not, right? So you can get with somebody and they can actually be toxic to you because their bacteria actually fights with each other, right? Yep. And what they found is that through smell of attraction, the bacteria was most compatible with the people that you found more attractive smells.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. As an ex-microbiologist, I think there's in the region of about 10 times more bacterial cells in and on us than there are human cells.
There is. I mean, basically, there's about 9 times actually. There's 55 trillion cells that make us up. It's only about 3% of our body mass, which is bacteria, because bacterial cells are so small. I mean, there's about 2 to 3 pounds of bacteria in our gut, yeah? And there's different bacterial colonies on each individual finger and in our mouth, in our eyes, and all that kind of stuff. So we're like a world map of different races of bacteria all over us, yeah? And over 90% of it is bacteria, and the 10% is our physical selves. And the interesting thing is the bacteria, biologically and DNA-wise, has got nothing to do with you, yet it controls who you're attracted to.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps there's so much bacteria in our gut, perhaps via the vagus nerve, which is a byway nerve from the brain to the gut, perhaps.
Well, it connects a lot of your organs together, yeah.
Does in some way hijack our nervous system and control our behavior.
Well, our gut flora and bacteria is directly correlative to cognitive function. They have found with bad diets, you actually lower your brain function because you kill a lot of the good bacteria. So okay, we're kind of going off track there, but you know, it is quite amazing. We think we're conscious. This is the whole thing yesterday. I could have done a whole workshop on this type of chemistry, right? Because if you understand that your sexual attraction and how you feel towards somebody, you think it's something to do with looks and how you feel and all that kind of stuff, and no, it's your bacteria taking control of your emotions. That's because there is a certain level of data transfer from the bacteria to your brain, to your understanding. You're not in control. Technically, you're not conscious of your sexual desires because it's the bacteria that's dictating it, not you.
Okay.
So when we talk about the beliefs and experiences, it is the programming in the background which is making you behave a certain way because of neurochemistry. So it's the neurochemistry that's actually controlling your behavior, not you. So this is why modern neuroscientists think that basically the brain is a remote control for the body to communicate with the outside world.
Okay. Now you mentioned an experience when you were 3 years old where you popped out of perhaps the human experience and...
Well, the popped out is the term that Gino Yu, the tenure professor at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, uses with his, I think it's the 7 stages of development, right? And it's basically you get to a certain point where you kind of come out of a certain level of consciousness and get a little bigger level of awareness, right? What happened to me, so what he also talks about, it might be worth putting his link, I've done an interview and he talks about it on my YouTube channel, where he talks about this, and people who pop end up having quite prolific experiences, see God, see the universe in a different way, see everything as energy, see everything as a hologram, see fractal mathematics and all this kind of stuff, which a lot of people get through DMT and LSD and psilocybin and all that kind of stuff. And when you realise actually the neurochemistry in those plants is actually endogenous in our brains anyway, you come back with different skill sets, different ways of looking at the world. Some are clairvoyance, clairsentience, you know, people who sense things, people who know things without knowing how they know. I, through an experience with my mother and father, my father was incredibly physically and aggressively abusive towards my mum. Now, at 3 years old, your heart fields are still connected to your mother. You use certain things like, you know, mirror neurons and all this kind of stuff, which then you physically experience the emotions that these other parties are having. So, because I experienced the trauma that my mum was having, I wanted to protect her, because children think the same when they're 3 years old, 10 years old, 50 years old, or anything. Everybody's got the inner child in them. Everybody thinks they're a different way. We just get different tools of the way to manage it. But I can honestly say that the difference in, you know, the way I feel as a human being deep down is no different from when I was 17 or anything. Yeah? You know, our souls are infinite and limitless and infinite, you know.
Gabor Marte, the Canadian psychiatrist, said something similar in a recent lecture, and he mentioned when he was a baby, he cried continuously because he grew up in Hungary in the middle of the Second World War, and the doctor came over and the parents were like, my baby's crying non-stop, what can we do? And the doctor said, I had this from every single Jewish baby, and the theory was that they feel their mother's stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Germans were going to come, the Nazis were going to come.
Yeah, that book, Feelings Better Alive Never Die, it talks about all this kind of stuff. You know, there was a study in there where they looked at babies after they were born from mothers who wanted a termination through various reasons, whether they were too young or, you know, it was inappropriate, whatever. They wanted a termination, right? But other forces made them keep the baby till term. The baby never suckled on the real mother. Would suckle on surrogate mothers, but not the natural mother. They felt the rejection. Yeah? So we start growing this worldview, not necessarily on a conscious level. It's just programming. It's just emotions, automatic response patterns built into the system. And that's through bacteria, through smell, through all sorts of stuff, right? And these are just programs that override our awareness. And subconscious surgery really is debugging that program set, right? By looking for stress responses in the body to language, yeah? And when you can find what language stresses you, we can then use a pattern interrupt to disassociate the stress from the language. In other words, you went through a slow process with Toastmasters, where over a period of time you disassociated the stress with speaking. Yeah, so now you can speak and not be stressed. Well, I can do that in an hour. Yeah, so in fact, one of my clients got to the Toastmasters World Final. And he would get very stressed and anxious and almost be sick. He could not eat anything before he went up and spoke. And I spoke to him just before the semi-finals of the World Toastmasters Championships, right? And he was panicking. He was like, oh, you know, I don't know if I can do it, right? So we did about a 1 hour subconscious surgery session. We found all that dysfunctional programming. I deleted it, gave him another program that he could run over it, right? Went to this world semi-finals, not an ounce of stress. In fact, several people came up to him afterwards and said, oh my God, that was unbelievable. You were the most relaxed person that we saw on the whole night. Yeah, so on my YouTube channel is the testimonial he gave me, because he was like blown away. In fact, he was so blown away about how I changed his life by deleting all these programs, he paid me to actually do the year training course to train to be a subconscious surgeon himself. So he can actually, because he's a high impact coach, so he calls himself the happiness coach, and he wanted to help business people be happy in business. But some people aren't happy in business because of the associated stress that's linked to it. Yeah? And the stress doesn't make you happy. Mm-hmm. But if you delete the stress, what's left is I'm happy.
So your method is essentially to help someone overcome trauma. I met with a friend of mine who's a well-known Swiss psychologist who did psychedelic therapy underground because she felt that was the most potent way to help people overcome the trauma. And I mentioned to her that I worked in a drug and alcohol rehab clinic in Camden, London, probably one of the worst afflicted places in Europe for drug addiction. And we had clients whose mother were drug users whilst they were in the womb, and some of them were doing sex work as well, and the baby was so severely traumatized. And Frederica said, with some cases, I don't see how you can overcome the trauma without replacing every cell in the body, perhaps in the future through stem cell therapy.
No, I disagree with that through personal experience. When it's not contained at a biological level, from what I understand and my research, it is a resonant vibrational frequency, yeah? And when you remove that resonant frequency, that echo, as it were, of that emotion, right, then it goes, yeah? So I've had a lot of clients which have had some very deep traumatic emotions. One that I found with a client recently, which is something we're working on to actually get out as a program which everybody can do, because it's pretty much the same program for anybody who's had their cord cut when they were born, yeah? So one of the first traumas that we get when we're born, if we're not stuck in the canal or, you know, anything cesarean and things like that before, right? Say it's a straightforward birth and you have a nice birth, when you come out, first thing they do is go, snip. Yeah?
I think also, to add to that, I think circumcision is probably more traumatizing as well.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, you know, there's that as well, which when you were talking about Jewish and things like that, I thought you were going to go down that route at first, because that is one of the traumas of the baby that actually happens, being circumcised. But, you know, the cutting of the cord is the one, because what it was is whenever he started to get successful and things started to go right, he would get this feeling come up, right, of dread, right, you know, and it's like pervaded his whole body, and then that's usually when things would go wrong, right? It was like self-fulfilling prophecy. So he asked me to delete the program for him, and when I was searching it, funnily enough, he was very sensitive, so I'm an empath, and I actually physically feel the emotions that people go through, right? And as I was looking for it and going through the range of emotions, he went, oh, I can feel it now. And I went, yeah, I've just found it. I've got it on video. It was pretty cool. And I says, right, yeah, I've got that. It's that feeling. Right, okay. So, and I traced it back, and it was like, right, that was from birth. And then I was like going through all the different scenarios, and it was like, it was the cutting of the cord. So basically, the kind of the psychology behind it is the baby in the womb, it's like as if they feel they're involved in the decision-making process to be born, right? Whether they are or not, it's just perception. They're born, right? It's like, right, yeah, I'm ready to go, I'll go. Oh, I'm here. And then the amniotic sac, it contains blood, contains nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and all sorts, which actually, if naturally just left, retracts into the baby's body.
It just withers.
Yeah, and it withers and just falls off. Right? That's the nature's way of doing it. So you're born, the first thing you do is lose part of your lifeline.
So would you recommend when women give birth that they don't cut the cord?
100%.
Do you know how long it takes for the whole...
About 2 days.
Okay.
I know it sounds a bit messy.
Yeah. I think
and a bit awkward.
Actually, they wait for it to fall off and then they eat the placenta, right?
Often they do, yes. Yeah. Once it falls off naturally, they eat it because, again, it's full of protein and nutrients. There are some cultures in the human experience that do the same thing. Yeah. And there's some people in the Western modern world which are actually emulating some of those by doing that as well. We've just been conditioned to think that's disgusting. Yeah. In reality, it's just, I think eating a slab of meat carved out the side of a cow that's been tortured all its life, filled with antibiotics and genetically modified food crops, pretty abhorrent myself. Yeah. And I used to be a steak eater, but then I learned and educated myself, because this is a different form of education. If we come back to education, a lot of people, when I tell them I've only read 2 books in my whole life, and I opted out of the education system, and they're like looking at me as if I'm some kind of genius, and I kind of, it's quite interesting when you use that word, because a lot of people get kind of very edgy about somebody saying they're a genius, right? But in Einstein's terms, everybody's a genius. It's just that they've stemmed it. Yeah. So it's not egotistical, which is a lot of people associated with it, but it's not. It's just that some people allow their genius to flourish and other people don't. But the long and short of it is I get put on a pedestal of this, great mind, and I, in the technical term, are uneducated.
Going back to the trauma and its possible location, do you think there's a physical basis for it that they perhaps discover eventually through science, or do you think it's beyond the plane of the physical?
Again, a very good question. I think, again, from everything that I've researched and I've seen, it is potentially something beyond the physical. So, we talk about Akashic records. I don't know if you're familiar with that kind of language, right? And again, they were skewing off into a real different, part of human psychology and the world and reality and the universe. This is information of past lives. Okay, so that's a totally different blog. It's not a blog,
this rests on the premise that consciousness is not limited to the confines of a biological organism.
Yeah, and I said a moment ago that these feelings are a resonant frequency in your biosphere. We've got to kind of delineate ourselves from the molecular, mechanistic, physical world, right? Because there's 2 kind of philosophies. One is the people that are in medicine and biology and everything like that, and the world is full of very physical, tangible things. Yeah? I'll mess up your sound. I've drunk that water out of a glass, right? But the glass, if I put it there, I can see you through it. Yeah? There's a glass table here, I can see through it. But it has the exact same atomic density to aluminium, or aluminum for our American friends. Yeah? You cannot see through aluminum or aluminium, but you can see through glass. Both of the same atomic weight and density. How does that work? Yeah? So what you've got to do is start looking at the world slightly differently, with the eyes that you've been veiled over and conditioned to think from. Yeah? So everything is just energy. In fact, if you got your iPad and you might have the retina display and everything looks really detailed, right? You cannot see a pixel. That's why it's called a retina display. Your retina, in normal viewing, cannot see the individual dots that make it up. But if you've ever spilt a little drop of water on it, suddenly you see all the little squares. Yeah, because it magnifies them, right? Now, if you do that to us, the pixels that we're made of are atoms. That's technically the level of resolution we can go down to before we stop being a physical thing, an atom. And in the Quran, it says, you know, man will look at what we're made of in ever-decreasing detail. And the more detail that they look into, more detail will be revealed. Yeah, I don't think it's exactly those words, but that's the premise, that we'll keep looking in smaller and smaller detail, and as we do, we will find smaller and smaller detail. And that's what we've done. We used to think that the cell was the smallest thing that was physically possible, right? Which is the human cell, because you can see that with a microscope. But then we had bacteria. We needed better microscopes. And then we got to atoms, right? Oh, that's the smallest thing. And then what we did was we blew the atoms apart and lots of bits came out, right? I was like, oh, quantum particles. They're the smallest things that the world's made of. Only because we haven't been able to grab hold of a quark or a photon and break it apart. Yeah? In fact, this is where it gets really weird, because when we look at the quantum particles that we're made of, when we look at them, they change the behaviour and disappear. And what technically you're made of is disappearing into the quantum field and reappearing somewhere else.
So the quantum field, do you think is possible? I'm a fan of the holographic universe theory.
Me too.
And it's got Edward Witten, who was voted the greatest living mathematician, who devised N-theory, and Juan Maldacena, the Argentinian physicist, has got them collaborating on it. And according to the holographic universe theory, a greater level of reality is encoded at the 2D Planck scale level on the boundary of the known universe, which also includes the event horizon of a black hole. And things work using quantum entanglement and perhaps filter down into this reality, but it's all orchestrated from that level. Yeah. And there could be several interfaces between that level and this, and there could be interfaces beyond that. The question is, how far does it go? Is it infinite?
I think it's infinite. It can't be anything else. Mm-hmm. You know, this is in essence Men in Black, right? If you've seen the film with the cat with the universe in its collar, you know what I mean? We could be, in essence, a quantum particle in somebody's atom. Yeah? So again, this is about fractal mathematics, as above, so below. Yeah? When you look at the neurons in the brain, it looks like the distribution of stars in the universe, or you know, dark matter and the filaments that make up how the galaxies all tie together and all kinds of stuff, right? And if you look at Benoit Mandelbrot's TED talk about fractal mathematics, everything has roughness, and it's very simple equations that make up loads of complexity. Yeah? So there's a lot, and again, in a lot of spiritual records and things like that, they reiterate very, very scientific principles that we actually now know today. And this is where we feel that information is not all contained in our physical reality. Yeah, it's a bit like the film Avatar. Yeah, somebody gets in a machine and projects the consciousness into this blue body that goes running around. In his eyes, in his premise, he is that alien. But is in a machine, projecting the consciousness. This is the Matrix. Someone somewhere projecting consciousness somewhere else. Yeah. Now, this is where kind of, if you go into a hall of mirrors and you stand there and you'll see two mirrors like that and you've got loads of iterations of the mirror, right? Life is a dream. So if we go into lucid dreaming, are we a dream having a dream? And if you dream in a dream, in the lucid dream, is that like the hall of mirrors? Mm-hmm. So is this like reality? All there is lots and lots of realities that are basically echoes or reflections or iterations of one. And is there multiple consciousness? Is there multiple people in the universe, probably an infinite number of amounts, sat here doing an interview, and actually it's me interviewing you. And we're drinking wine, not water.
Perhaps we'll finish with discussing the machine that you described when you went to Peter Fenwick's house recently. Now, Peter Fenwick is a psychiatrist, I believe, that's done a lot of research on kind of parapsychology.
Yeah, higher abilities,
Yeah.
which is why, Gino, you invited me to go around looking to do scientific research in what we call me being an empath, or I'm clairsentient. Yeah, so I physically experience other people's emotions, whether I'm with them, whether I can see them, whether they're on the other side of the planet. Right? I use this to test people. I demonstrated it in the thing where I could actually tell people their love language or quite fine detail about them, write it on a board before I test them, and then test them and get the exact same results. How do I do that? So that's what they wanted to see. So I got invited around there. So I was sat talking to Peter, like we are now, and at first I thought he wasn't quite fully present with me. Because he kept kind of looking over here, right? And I'm talking to him, and he'd just keep glancing and keep glancing. And I just didn't think of anything of it. It was kind of off-putting a bit, but I just kept going. And then he went, "Since you've got here, that lamp's been going crazy." And I was like, okay, because I didn't know what the hell he was on about. Right? Thought he was just being a bit eccentric.
Yeah.
And he went, he says, "Just look at that lamp and turn it blue." I just turned around and I just thought and felt. That's probably more the thing for me. I felt a resonance in my body. It was about here, 2 points, here and there, where I felt a vibrational resonance. Right? It was kind of weird. Right? Well, it's not weird. I've felt it many, many times in my life, usually when I'm tapping into other people's energies. And it just went, zoof, this dark, 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 piercing blue. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. And he says, yeah, it's called the Mind Lamp. And what it is that there's a thing called the Global Consciousness Project. Is it Princeton University, isn't it, that started the project? And they created these quantum random number generators. And they create random numbers. Now, if they start producing unrandom numbers, in other words, they deviate from their randomness, right, plus or minus, it spews out different information. So what they did is they put them into a lamp. And they found that if they got people, and usually it was a number of people around a desk focusing their intention onto it, they could get this quantum random number generator to throw out non-random numbers, right? So in other words, the thought affects something outside our body, which was kind of weird, right? Because in science, it's like nothing inside you can affect what's outside you, right? So what they did is in this lamp, depending on the deviation, it changes colour, right? So he turned around, he says, look, yeah, look at the lamp, make it change blue. I did, without thinking, yeah? It just told me I'd been making it go haywire. So obviously I could affect it. So I just saw a little tiny tinge of blue in it, and I focused on that and kind of felt it, and then I felt it kind of couple, and then it just zoof, they went down to blue. And then we got talking again, it went back like white, right? 5 minutes later he went, just do it again for us. And I looked at it, took a deep breath, went straight blue again, right? And I was like, well, that's cool, right? And then we carried on talking, and he went, do it again. I think I did it out something like 8 or 10 times, right? In the space of the couple of hours I was there, right? And every time I could look at it and turn it a dark blue. But I didn't know, there's a Jim Rohn. He says sometimes God gives something to somebody stupid enough to not realise it was impossible, who just goes ahead and does it anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And that's when he told me that he's had it so many years and he can't do it to that level of accuracy. And then he turned around to another kid that was in the room called Gio, and he went, see if you can make it change colour. And he was there going, like this, nothing. Just stayed white. Gino as well, stayed white, right? And he went, you do it. Went blue again. And I was like, cool. But I mean, this kind of triggered me a little bit in some ways, because it brought up kind of why, when I was 11 or 12 years old, I would just meet people randomly, in my day-to-day life, and I would sense how they feel. And what I would do is tell them how they feel, yeah? And tell them who caused it, and actually why they didn't mean it, because it was not to do with them. Oh, your dad shouted at you this morning, didn't he? It just had an argument with your mum. It's got nothing to do with you. It's just stressed. And you could see them like, first, how the hell do you know that? Because that was true, yeah? I've just met them, random stranger. Secondly, that makes me feel so much better, right? You saw the stress go out of them, right? And it just like deleted the stress of the body. I felt like a bit like an earth angel, like going around telling people. I just had the ability to say to them what they needed to hear right in that moment to make them feel better, yeah? And then I got to a point where people would go, oh, do it to them, do it to them, do it to them. And I got treated a bit like a freak show, yeah? So eventually, when I got like 14-ish and things like 15, it was kind of, I was some kind of weirdo. And when I say I switched it off, is sometimes I didn't switch it off. It was still there. It's always operated in the background. I still feel everybody's emotions and everything like that. It's just that I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to be a weirdo. I was weird enough with ginger hair and being really skinny and being picked on for that reason. Yeah? And the thing was, is I knew how all the bullies felt about me because of this power as well. But people weren't ready to recognise it. You know, nowadays with the film like X-Men and all that kind of stuff, we're kind of now being conditioned to consider that we may have superhuman powers. So this is why I got invited over to the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. This is why Juno Yu invited me round to meet Peter Fenwick, because they want to scientifically research, get me in functional MRIs, I'm a bit of a guinea pig, and find out how is it that I can do this extrasensory perception. Yeah. And how I can read people's minds no matter where they are in the world, from a photograph, just from a name.
Now, I know we need to wrap it up, but I have one final question, promise. Based on what you were just talking about, I've met many shamans all over the world, and it seems like a consistent theme is that they went through really bizarre episodes their entire life. A friend of mine is a shaman, and he was struck by lightning as a baby, and he says that he had periods where he'd see demons and crazy things would happen, and it was a message in their culture, a calling to be a shaman, to heal people, and if you ignore that calling, you've been given a gift, and if you ignore the calling, then really terrible things happen.
Yeah, I can relate with that. I've been bankrupt 3 times, as we mentioned earlier.
There we go.
I've had 7 businesses where I got ripped off by my business partners. One of them was my dad. I actually set up a business with my dad, and then he ripped me off. Yeah. He ripped me off with a car, right? Yes. I've had very abusive relationships. Being a healer, being someone who's an empath, who's empathic, who's has a lot of empathy, has a lot of love, I used to tend to attract you know, I don't like to say damaged people, you know, nobody's damaged, but people that needed healing as such, yeah? The challenge is at the time I didn't have the tools really, or maybe I wasn't allowing myself to know the tools to heal them. And it would end up being a trauma for me. I was in a relationship where my wife was an alcoholic, and I got physically abused. I was one of the 40% of males that actually the physical abuse was targeted at the male. Yeah, not the woman, not the other way around. And she'd come home. Yeah, I'd get home from work. She'd have 2 bottles. She'd had 2 bottles of wine, pissed out of her head. She'd then have a go at me because I asked if I had a clean shirt for tomorrow morning because I got in at 10 o'clock at night. You know, it sounds, you know, oh, he's a prehistoric man. No, it's just that I was working 14 hours a day to feed her alcoholic habit and all this kind of stuff. And she'd spit at me, kick at me, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of dysfunctional relationships. So, I mean, I did a, again, this is kind of maybe going out there for some people, some of the readers or watchers or viewers or listeners will be able to relate with this in some ways, but I did a past life thing. Now, the interesting bit is she could do the same testing that I could, you know, by distance, with the muscle testing. And we both came to the same figure, the same number of past lives that I had totally separately, right, which is 2,788 past lives. Right? And what she does is past life vows. So if I'd been a monk in a previous life and took a vow of chastity, yeah, or a vow of poverty, then I might take a vow that in the next lifetime that I'm going to carry on that vow because that's how devout I was to that cause. So I had 485 past lives where I'd taken a vow of, what was it now?
Celibacy?
No, it wasn't celibacy. It was self-destruction. Yeah. So 480-odd vows of self-destruction, right? And, you know, a lot of negative ones to suppress me and all that kind of, you know, thing. And she actually turned around, she says, out of every client I've ever seen, she says, you've had the most challenging journey I've ever seen in my whole life. You know, and again, this is not me saying I'm something special because of all this. It's kind of maybe the opposite in some ways. But yeah, you know, I can relate to that completely. So my life pursuit, and really what I kind of entered when I was 18, and what those talents I had when I was very young. And as I've gone back in retrospect, I've seen loads of episodes when I was 5 years old, when I knew somebody wanted waking up, and I woke him and then got in trouble for doing it, and this, that, and the other. I've seen that gift. I've seen how that gift has got me into trouble, so I've suppressed it. And then all these problems all happened. And now I'm starting to let it out, and starting to use it to heal people and help people. My life is going incredible, and it's amazing. So, yeah, 100% directly correlative to that.
Are there any self-sabotage elements you can read in me right now and then interviews and do?
Okay. So, so your emotional financial ceiling, how much you're prepared to earn before it stresses you, is about the 50,000 mark. Yeah, between 40 and 50.
That's weird.
Wow.
I say that to everyone. I'm totally happy being on that amount. I don't need any more, and I'm on considerably more, and I feel bad for it.
Yeah, that's the reason why. It doesn't mean that you won't earn more. You can, but if you do, it causes trauma.
Right now, mate. Wow. Yeah. I say that to so many people.
That exact figure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that wasn't scripted. Yeah. You can tell by your face.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So that's a limiting belief.
Yeah.
You're limiting yourself, and that's what's causing you unhappiness in earning more.
Yeah.